Here's a quick demo for making a shadow from that fence. And I'm going to show you a little trick with the blur tool along with using it as a smart object. So I'm going to hold Command on my Mac or Control for Windows and click on the fence layer to select its pixels. I'll make a new layer and put that beneath it for the fence shadow. And then we'll fill that with black. Fill, black, deselect. Now it's directly behind the fence, but we're going to transform it here. Bring this little middle point down, and golly, I forgot the name of it at the moment, but let it stop at that bottom line somewhere, because we're going to flip this thing vertically, and that way it'll flip around that point there instead of centered around the center of it. So flip vertically. Now we have our shadow down here. Let's turn it into a smart object. I right-click on the layer and choose Convert to Smart Object, or from Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. That turns it into a smart object. You can see its little icon right here. We're going to transform it again. I pressed Command-T or Control-T on Windows. Now hold Command or Control down and click on this point down here just to give it whatever angle you want. The rest of the shadows in this particular image went approximately this direction. So there we have it there. Now let's give it some blur. Filter, Blur Gallery. We'll do Field Blur. Field Blur lets us put down a couple of points that define where and how much the image is going to be blurred. Now let me bring this panel over here. You can adjust how much blur is applied at this point by clicking on this and rotating or dragging the slider. And I'm going to have it at 0 blur at this end. And now you see the little plus icon? Press that for an additional blur point, and we'll put that at 0 blur too, because what I'm going toward is having some blur out here. So there it is with some blur out at the end. And I put another one there, and you can see the blur is nice and gradual. I'm going to bring it up a little bit closer. You can put as many of these points around your image as you want to. Pretty nice. And keep in mind that not every light source is going to blur it. The sun isn't going to blur it. But a nearer light source, like a window, it might be sharp down here, but it will become more blurred down here. But a nearer light source, like with a window, will let the shadow be sharp here and blurred down here. So being able to selectively blur something with field blur is nice, but I would have needed to put a couple more blur points in there, because you can see that here's a sharp area, then a blurry area, then a sharp area. That's not how they would behave. So let's go back into there and adjust it. Since we made it a smart filter, the changes that we have applied to the filter are listed below it here. And we can double click our blur gallery to get back into the blur gallery. And when we are there, we can see that our field blur is set up just the way we had left it, with our 2 points out here that are not blurred, and our 3 points over here that are blurred at 8 pixels. But what we notice is that the blur is uneven. I would need to add more control points to even out this blur. You can see that some are sharp here, some are blurred, some are sharp, etc. Let's skip field blur completely because of that, and let's try tilt shift blur. With tilt shift blur, and let me just move this around so you can see it, it gives us a gradient blur, a blur that is controlled like a gradient. And you can control where things are blurred by dragging these lines. As you can see, the middle part is the sharp area. Outside of this line, it starts getting blurred in this direction, and outside of this line, it starts getting blurred in the other direction. And you can control how much of that blur is happening with this slider up here. It's blurring 15 pixels, but you can control where it happens with these by moving in these different lines here a little bit. And I'm moving them in toward the center here in order to bring the blur in. I don't want the blur to affect those. So let's move it upwards. So I'm trying to get this end of the shadow to be sharp, so it's in this zone of sharpness. I did not mean to angle that, although you can angle it if you want to by bringing your cursor up near one of these 2 white handles, very near it, and then you can rotate it. If we want to rotate this at all, though, it's not going to be by much. And basically, this is our blur. You can play with distortion amount, and you can play with the amount of blur. And you can play with the zone of blur by dragging this out. This extends the gradual transition between the sharp and the blurred area, and this moves the sharp area outward. You can do that on the other end of the blur too. Click OK when you're done, and you've got your blurred shadow.